The potential of dialogue. Suppose we were able to share meetings freely, without a compulsive urge to impose our view on others, and without distortion and self-deception. Would this not constitute a real revolution in culture? David Bohm, Changing Consciousness, 1992. Imagine if you put the following message over the door of each meeting room in this country. As a result of the conversation I just experienced during my time in this room, my perception was altered. Our group experiences tend to differ significantly from this goal. We don't usually enter a meeting room with the intent of learning something, of having our perceptions altered and expanded by listening to and thinking about those thoughts and feelings that others share. In fact, we've actually created environments where people are not comfortable in expressing their true thoughts and feelings. We want to do what is politically correct, and we want to avoid saying anything that could be taken out of context. Think about the meetings you attend. Rank order them based on how comfortable you feel saying what you think in each one. What types of changes are needed to reduce the variation between your best meetings, the meetings where you truly can say what you think, and your weakest meetings where you're just scared to death to say anything? What types of changes are needed to reduce that variation from an openness perspective? What percentage of your team members rarely say anything in meetings unless called upon? What is the downside of continuing to restrict what and how we share information in groups? Isn't there some value, a need, in learning how to become better at dialogue? At learning to suspend our assumptions, to ask ourselves in what way could our assumptions be wrong, to let our assumptions be expanded and for us to learn by listening from others? Can we resolve our current communication crisis or one that might emerge in the coming years if we don't? Your challenge after learning more about the concept of dialogue will be to find ways of taking personal action to help restore it in our society, or at least in those work teams that you participate in regularly. Dialogue takes the process of communication to the next level, and dialogue is needed. The importance of dialogue. All problem-solving groups should begin in a dialogue format to facilitate the building of a sufficient common ground and mutual trust, and to make it possible to tell what is really on one's mind. We spend a lot of time talking with others in groups. Some of us spend a lot of time sitting, listening to others talk in groups. If you reflect back on recent experiences you've had doing this, you'll probably remember both good and bad experiences. It's likely that in a formal meeting at work, you probably remembered some disagreements or opinion differences. You probably also have had more pleasant conversations in your work area or in the cafeteria with a coworker who's also a friend. Because we spend so much time attempting to communicate in groups, and because we can expect to do it even more in the coming years, it's important to understand the concept of dialogue. I knew nothing of it until I read Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline. Team learning is one of the 5 disciplines covered in the book, and along with mental models and systems thinking, it's very key to building communicative skills. Dialogue is central to helping us suspend our own assumptions so we can learn from others. Consider the statements provided in this video relative to how you think about the terms dialogue and discussion. Evaluate how well they match up with your group meetings experiences. Dialogue, that's to raise to a higher level. Discussion, to bang together like percussion or concussion. Also, consider other group events that you've witnessed, either in person or on television. Have we as a society, at least as we now know it, lost the capacity for dialogue? Peter Senge asked that question 30 years ago. Think about where we are now. The Greeks of ancient times felt that the society that has lost its capacity for dialogue has also lost its capacity for self-governance. At a time when we need to learn and think, interact differently to resolve tough issues, we are actually moving further away from the ability to do so. It seems to be more important to get our point across to others, or to have it accepted as being right than it is to learn from the alternative perspectives that others have. The roots of team learning. Dialogue and discussion are the roots of team learning. As I just mentioned, discussion is similar to percussion and concussion when you look at its Latin root. The Latin root of dialogue is from dialogos, which means meaning flowing through. The purpose of dialogue is to go beyond any one individual's understanding. To help you provide a better picture of dialogue, let's look at the Latin roots of these two terms, discussion and dialogue. The roots of the word discussion are very similar to those of percussion and concussion. All three have to do with banging one thing against another. In this sense, discussion can be defined as throwing one's opinions against those that others have. How many meetings have you been in where this happens? The root of the term dialogue, on the other hand, involves learning and thought transfer, as it means meaning flowing through. When we participate in dialogue, we learn something by exploring the perceptions of others. We don't have to agree with them, but let's explore them. Learn from them. We make this possible by first creating an environment where it's comfortable for others to share their perceptions. Perhaps more importantly, we allow the beliefs of others to call ours into question. We do not enter into a conversation thinking, let alone convinced, that our personal assumptions are the only right ones. Instead, we should ask ourselves, in what way could my assumptions be wrong? And we need to be willing to admit that we do not have all the answers. As Socrates taught me many years ago, the only thing I know is I don't know it all. As I've learned more about the concept of dialogue, I've been able to have more true dialogues with others. The personal learnings I've received as a result are invaluable. To date, I've mainly experienced dialogue in a one-to-one setting with others who are also familiar with the concept or willing to explore it with me. I'm beginning to experience dialogue in groups, however, and that is where the true value of the concept is realized. It's one worth learning and practicing and teaching to others. So developing our capacity for dialogue. If teams can't learn, neither can the organization. This means we need to learn to recognize the patterns of interaction in teams that undermine learning. These are such things as defensive routines. It can start with dialogue, suspending assumptions in order to learn to think together. But we need to get better at identifying defensive routines and setting up practice fields. These are some key things I learned from The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge over 30 years ago. Invaluable to me. In the book The Fifth Discipline, Peter Senge considers dialogue to be the key to team learning. One of the key reasons for having teams is to benefit from the varied and different perceptions that several people have. This is one reason we're willing to spend the additional people hours to have several people review a problem or to evaluate possible solutions. We can have one person do it. But if we can't do this sharing from a dialogue perspective, we're wasting most of the group time we're investing. One special type of group event behavior serves as an indicator of whether discussion or dialogue is taking place, and we call these defensive routines. Defensive routines can be executed by an individual or a group. They involve the defense of one's opinion, even in the absence of facts to support it. You can probably remember times when you've witnessed this happen, or you may have done it a time or two yourself. It's often the case that some people are willing to fight to the death for their opinion, and it's often hard to go a day without doing so. But it's possible. Defensive routines probably account for more wasted work time in American business than any other factor. We don't measure the number of defensive routines that occur each day, or how long they last, or what their impact is. But perhaps technology will someday do that for us. It can sense the emotion going up in the room. It can sense a more rapid exchange of information between people. There's an algorithm you can write to sense defensive routines. But the next time you're in a group setting, just keep track of how many occur, how much group time they waste, how much value they add, if any. If you can learn to ask the question, in what way could my assumptions be wrong? It's a very valuable thing to do. It helps you break out of a defensive routine. But you have to be willing to suspend your own assumptions about what is right. I visualize, because I'm a visual person, hanging these assumptions in front of my face. Okay, I think this is this. I think this is this. But what if it isn't? But what if it's the opposite? But what if this is also a factor? Strive to better understand the perspective of the other person. The true victory lies in the higher level of understanding that both parties often receive. So what are defensive routines? Because if we want to move towards dialogue, we need to learn to recognize when defensive routines are occurring. As we get better at recognizing them, we can begin to ask questions to help explore alternative perspectives. Have we considered this? Have we thought about this? What happens if we do consider this? What if this is not true? What if it is true? This, of course, only can happen after you've stopped initiating or contributing to defensive routines yourself. Begin by explaining the dialogue concept to someone else. Start with a good friend. Try to identify when you're having a dialogue with this person. I can still remember the dialogues I have had with Steve and with Colin and with Chuck over the years. Just beautiful conversations. Makes attempts to notice how your perception can be altered and expanded if you're willing to let it be. After getting better at recognizing dialogue and the conditions that make it possible, try to experience it in a group setting. Again, try to do it first with a group of people you know well. Eventually, you should teach the concept to your work team, with the goal first being to recognize defensive routines and how they occur. And just imagine if you're in a work team meeting and someone raises their hand and they say, "Hey folks, aren't we having a bit of a defensive routine here? Aren't we kind of just banging opinions together?" That could be enough of an icebreaker to put a halt to that and get you back on a good track. At a team meeting, you might want to give everyone in the group a red card and ask them to hold up the card if they see a defensive routine starting to emerge. Or if you want to take it a little further, yellow card and then red card. Give them a chance. When the card goes up, you can facilitate a discussion of the process that led to the feelings that were just expressed. How did we get to where we are? Don't challenge the individual. Explore the team process. How did we get to where we are? Don't think you know it all. Look at how they could be right and wrong. But more importantly, observe how they are different. There's value in learning the differences. Over time, people become more and more aware of their own perceptions and how they influence the effectiveness of the group. They'll learn to manage themselves. The first step is to create an open and safe work group environment. So to wrap up this second chapter on facilitating and leading teams, we're going to have just a very simple exercise, and you should take the time to look at your communication preferences. Get to know how you prefer to send information, how you prefer to receive it, and how you like to process it. Then work outward with your team. There's some worksheets in the book to help you do this. I'm always quite happy to help you out with your questions. This is the end of Chapter 2. Stay tuned for Chapter 3. It's on exploring the group process and how to get the most out of getting together. Have a super day, folks. Have a super time in your teams and keep improving.